Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's latest Facebook Live presentation, Meet Your Monarch Butterfly. Thanks so much for joining us today, and apologies for not getting our stream up a little bit earlier today, where we had some technical difficulties. So I hope that you can still, or glad that you're still joining us today after the little glitch that we had, and we hope to have another great presentation for you today. We'll be talking about one of the most well-known and most photographed butterflies in North America today, the monarch butterfly. We'll get into the monarch butterfly's life cycles, its crazy migration journey, and you'll learn a little bit more about how you can help them thrive around Riverwood as well, right in your neighborhood. So hope you're doing well, staying safe. My name is Rashid Clark. I'm the marketing specialist at the Riverwood Conservancy. Thanks again for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please drop them into the comments section and we'll get to them as we go throughout the presentation and at the end. And just a reminder that we do have in-person events happening once again in the park at Riverwood. It's been many months since we've done that, and we're doing it very slowly with small groups, socially distanced, masks are mandatory. We do hope to have more events happening throughout the month of October, so have a look at our website, theriverwoodconservancy.org, for more information about our upcoming in-person and virtual events, because we have a lot of stuff happening in October. And if you have the financial means to make a donation, we'd very much appreciate it while you're on our website so we can keep programs like this going strong. And I'll turn things over now to Stephanie Keeler, who is formerly our Education Naturally teacher and currently our community program coordinator. Still getting used to the titles, Stephanie. And also she is clearly Queen of the Butterflies, as you can see from her crown. So Stephanie, thanks so much for presenting today, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Rashid, and I'm hoping that this crown makes up for all of our technical difficulties. I saw a lot of people were interested in this topic, so I'm very excited to talk a little bit about the monarch butterfly today, and hopefully I do them some justice as well. So we are going to start out with Monarch 101 to get started. Now, many people believe that they know the full story of monarch butterflies, their life cycle, but it's a lot more intricate than you think it is. So the monarchs go with 4 life cycles. So they have 4 different life stages. And within each of those life stages, they do that 4 times. So they have 4 different generations and 4 different life stages. So the first life stage is obviously that egg. And then their second life stage is the caterpillar. The third life stage is our chrysalis, which is that bright green thing at the bottom. And then the fourth life stage is obviously the adult monarch butterfly. So beautiful. Now, they do this cycle of life stages 4 times within a year. And I'm going to be talking a little bit later on about how that works. So we're going to get started from the tiniest part of the monarch butterfly, which is the egg. They are very hard to see. They're almost microscopic on our plants. The best way to find them is obviously finding their host plant, which is the milkweed. If you see a big field of milkweed, you're often able to find monarch or traces of monarchs. So this is the little tiny egg that the monarch comes in at the very start of its life, and they are only laid on 1 leaf by themselves. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, why they're by themselves on these 1 leaves. But they're very, very tiny, and you can find them underneath or on the top of milkweed plants. Now, monarchs stay in this egg for about 4 to 5 days before they hatch. And when they do, they look a little bit like this. This caterpillar here is actually bigger than what they emerge out of the egg of. So their egg there is just at the top, and then right beside it is the newly born monarch caterpillar. Now, the reason why monarchs only lay 1 egg on 1 leaf and sometimes even 1 plant is because these monarchs, when they hatch out of those eggs, they're very, very, very hungry. And I'm sure all of us have read The Very Hungry Caterpillar. This is a very true statement. Caterpillars are super hungry, and basically what they do throughout this life stage is eat, eat, eat. Now, if a monarch was to lay an egg beside another egg, they have some difficulties there. If 1 egg hatches before the other, this little caterpillar will actually eat the other egg. So monarchs try to lay 1 egg on 1 leaf or even 1 plant. which is pretty incredible to think about, because within a monarch's lifespan of about 2 to 6 weeks, they can lay up to 200 to 700 eggs. So that's all on separate leaves all over a milkweed plant. So it's pretty crazy. Now, once these monarchs have eaten all the milkweed plant that they can, they look more like this. This is what you often find. They're a lot easier to find at this stage. They have gone through 5 molts, which means they basically shed their entire skin or their exoskeleton completely off, and they've done that 5 times. Now, every time this monarch sheds its exoskeleton or it molts, it actually consumes its own skin, because these monarchs, all they want to do is eat. All they want to do is grow and get as big as possible. And once they've eaten a bunch and they've grown really big, these monarchs will start to turn into a chrysalis. Now, monarchs will spin a little pad of silk onto a milkweed plant, and they'll attach themselves to that, and then they'll form into something called a J shape. And this is when you know that the monarch is getting ready to turn into a chrysalis. Now, there are some differences between a chrysalis and a cocoon. Cocoons are often what moths create. So they actually spin an entire silk web around themselves and encapsulate themselves in this cocoon. So cocoons are just silk. Chrysalis are the actual body of the caterpillar. So the caterpillar goes through one last molt. It opens up its exoskeleton once again, and it sheds it. And underneath that will be this bright green chrysalis, just like this one here. So on the left, that is what the chrysalis is. That's its last molting phase. And the monarchs will stay in these chrysalis for about 2 to 14 days. So about 2 weeks long, they'll stay into this chrysalis. It's very pretty. And you'll know that the monarchs are about to emerge when they've kind of become translucent, and you can see the monarch through that. So when they start becoming translucent, it's about 18 or so hours before that monarch will actually emerge. So it's usually the night before, and then in the morning, you'll see your monarch has emerged. Now, once these monarchs emerge and they crack out of their chrysalis, it only takes a couple minutes for them to get out of their chrysalis, but then they stay there and they hang for about 30 minutes to 2 hours. And what they're doing is they're pumping their body with fluids. They're pumping their wings with fluids, and they're trying to dry off. They were encapsulated so tightly in this small little chrysalis, and now when they've emerged, they need to dry off, and they need to fill those wings so that they can fly away and start drinking nectar and mating. And once they finally emerge, they look like these 2 beautiful monarchs here. The one on the left is a female, and the one on the right is a male. And there's one distinct feature about these monarch butterflies that will help you understand which one's male and female. On the right, you can see on the underwings, the monarchs have these 2 black dots, the prominent black dots on the lower wings. That means that this monarch is a male. The female doesn't have those black dots, so that's how you defer the 2, because they don't really differ in size or color. And once they have come out of their chrysalis, what they're doing is they're just collecting nectar and drinking nectar, and then they're going to start breeding and hopefully laying the next generation. Now, monarchs often are thought to just use milkweed plants in order to gain nectar or to eat, but monarchs actually don't rely on the milkweed plant itself at this stage as an adult. They're looking for any kind of flower source that has nectar in it so that they can gain some energy. So this plant here is a really great one to have in your garden. It's called a butterfly bush, and it grows really, really big. So if you do end up trying to buy this, find a really big spot for it, because these things grow huge, and they're great for monarchs, but as well bees and other types of butterflies as well. So if you're ever going to start a pollinator garden, this is a really great plant to use. Now, like we've been talking about before, the milkweed plant is the host plant for the monarch. So if we had no milkweed, we would have no monarchs. Monarchs rely on these milkweeds in order to grow larger as caterpillars and actually turn into chrysalis. Now, there's many different species of monarchs, often the ones that we kind of associate, or sorry, there's many different species of milkweeds, Often the one that we associate with monarchs is the common milkweed that you see here, but there's many different kinds of milkweeds that the monarchs can rely on as well. Butterfly weed and swamp milkweed are ones that they'll use as well to eat and to grow as caterpillars. Now, what makes milkweed so special is it has this ooey, milky sap. And if you've ever cracked off a leaf on a milkweed plant, you've got that white sap on your fingers, and it's very, very sticky. This is actually toxic. So it makes the monarchs, as caterpillars and as adults, actually toxic to animals and insects that want to eat them. Any predator that wants to eat them can see from their coloration that they are saying, whoa, I'm toxic, I don't taste very good, and maybe they'll decide to move along. So the monarch caterpillar, while it's eating this milkweed plant, it's consuming some of that white sappy stuff, and it's actually gaining toxins in its body. The monarch has adapted and evolved in order to eat this toxin and not get sick itself, but rather use these toxins in order to create a defense mechanism against different predators. So the caterpillar is yellow, black, and white, and the adult monarch butterfly is orange and black, and this is saying basically, I don't taste very good, don't even try to eat me. Now, the milkweed plant, though, is not only growing just to supply the do not want monarchs on them. They have their own defense mechanisms to deter insects like the monarch caterpillar from eating them. They want to grow, they want to reproduce, they want to expand their population just like monarchs do. So milkweeds do not want these caterpillars on them. So they have a couple defense mechanisms themselves in order to deter them from being eaten. So one of them, if you can see, there's little microscopic hairs that are on the leaves. Many ants and different insects won't want to eat this because it's fuzzy, it doesn't have much nutrients in it. The monarch, when it first hatches out of the egg, however, will actually shave some of that hair off so that it can get down to the juicy nutrients that's inside the milkweed plant. Another thing, like we talked about before, the milkweed produces that white sappy stuff, and it's very, very sticky. So sticky that it can actually close the monarch's caterpillar's mandibles shut. So if they eat too much of this white sappy stuff, their mouth or their mandibles will actually be glued shut. This can happen with their feet too. If they're walking on top of the white sap, they can get stuck to the leaf. So many mortalities actually happen through these monarch caterpillars because they consume too much of the sap. There are a couple ways that the monarchs try to get around this. The first one is by cutting the supply where that sap comes out of the plant. So I'll just go back and forth one more time. So the monarchs will start at the top of the leaf and they'll work all the way down the leaf like you see there, and then they'll go back up to the top again. And the reason they're doing this is the vein at the very top that they've already cut has had some time to drain some of that sap out so that they don't actually glue their mandibles shut. A more common sight is these circles. So if you grow milkweed in your own garden or you've seen it in nature, often many times these leaves will have these big holes on them. And this is an adaptation by the monarch caterpillar in actually to try not to glue its mandibles shut. So what it will do is it will cut kind of a U shape to start. It will wait, it will let those veins in those leaves to drain that, that sappy gooey stuff out, and then it will eat in a circle around where all of those different veins have been cut. So that supply has been cut to the different parts of those leaves, and there's no longer sap that will glue their mandibles shut. There is still some because that's what contains the toxin that makes the monarch taste so bad, but it's not so much so that it will actually glue their mandibles shut or their feet. Now, monarchs are toxic and they don't taste very good, and this has actually caused evolution of different butterflies and different insects to try to mimic them. So one of the most common references to the mimicry is the viceroy butterfly. So you see on your left there, the smaller butterfly is a viceroy. And you can tell as it's smaller, it's often a brighter orange, and its underwing has that straight across black line on it. And that's how you know that it's a viceroy. So they're actually mimicking the monarch butterfly because they're toxic. So they're trying to protect themselves as well. So recent research actually showed that the viceroy butterfly, who consumes poplars and willows, may be toxic as well. So they could have co-evolved together in order to have a greater chance of defending themselves against multiple species. If both of them are slightly toxic, this is a great way to defend yourself against being eaten by predators. Now, that does not stop predators from eating them. Many different species of insects will eat them, as well as birds. When caterpillars, the monarch caterpillars are, the monarch eggs are on the leaves, ants will often eat them. When monarch caterpillars are on the leaves, some species of spiders will eat them, as well as praying mantis. When they are in the chrysalis, a common sight to see is a wasp eating them. And when they are the butterfly, praying mantis will love to eat those, and some species of birds as well will eat these monarch as adults. Now, they don't only have predators that will try to eat them, they also have many parasites that have been impacting them greatly lately. OE parasite is a debilitating parasite to the monarch butterfly. Basically, OE parasite are these tiny little spores that attach themselves to the abdomen of the monarch adult. As a butterfly, it will fly around, it will have these tiny little OE spores all over its abdomen. Now, this monarch will fly around, it will interact with different monarch butterflies, it will also lay some eggs. So as it's flying around, it's actually spreading these spores to different monarch butterflies, and as well, when it lays its eggs, these eggs will hatch and they will actually see these OE parasites first thing. That's the first thing they see when they hatch out of their egg. And once again, these caterpillars are super hungry. So what they'll do is they'll consume these OE spores. These spores then live inside of these caterpillars, and they basically use the inside of the caterpillar to grow larger and reproduce inside the caterpillar. Often what happens is the caterpillars can actually die, or they go to chrysalis with these OE parasites. And that's when you often see these black chrysalis. If you've ever raised your own monarch butterfly, you may have encountered this black chrysalis, and it is the worst feeling ever when you see that. But it could be caused by OE parasite. Another thing that could cause the black chrysalis is parasitic wasp. These wasps will actually wait until the monarch goes into a chrysalis form or is starting to form into a chrysalis. They'll lay a bunch of eggs, and these wasps will grow and eat the insides of the monarch while it's in the chrysalis, and then emerge. Many of them will emerge from the chrysalis. Now, this actually unfortunately happened at my house. I was raising some monarch butterflies outdoors, and I had gone away for the weekend, and when I came back, my beautiful green chrysalis was no longer green, but instead it looked like this. So you can see there's that big black hole, which I'm assuming that parasitic wasp took over, and that's where they emerged from afterwards. But actually, I have a video. It didn't work, unfortunately, but this wasp here, which is a different species of wasp, came by after, cracked open the chrysalis, and was eating all the leftovers that were in the chrysalis. It's pretty gross and sad, but also kind of interesting. And the last thing that doesn't directly impact monarchs, but indirectly impacts monarchs, are aphids. They are the pest of the milkweed plant. If you've ever grown your own milkweed, you will know how annoying these things are. This is a photo I actually took in downtown Toronto. They had a pollinator garden with many milkweed plants, and every single milkweed looked like this. So there were hundreds of these little aphids on these milkweed plants, which is really unfortunate. It's not that they attack the monarch at all. It's more so that they suck the life out of the plant itself, and the monarchs don't want to eat on these plants when there's hundreds of other little aphids on there. One thing I would recommend if you have aphids on your own plant is to simply squish them, unfortunately, or to spray them off with water every day and just check up on them. But if they get past all of those struggles, the parasites, the aphids, the predators, then hopefully they will be able to emerge as a beautiful butterfly and live their life. And once they do emerge, the first couple generations of monarch will live about 2 to 7 weeks long. So not very long. And during that 2 to 7 weeks, they're mostly eating and reproducing. So like I said, they can lay anywhere to 200 to 700 eggs. So they're laying many, many eggs. Now, in the fall, so about this time of year when the days start getting shorter and the weather starts getting cooler, the monarchs get a signal inside them. So they have some sort of internal clock that tells them that it's time to migrate. Now, the monarchs that are born in August, September, they are slightly different than the other generations. Now, all of these monarchs will hatch and they will reproduce, but the fourth generation, which is the last generation born in the fall, will not reproduce. Instead, it will suppress these hormones that produce their reproductive system, and so they will not be able to reproduce, they will not be able to mate. And instead, they use that energy to grow their wings really, really big and to be very durable so that they can be able to actually migrate great distances. Now, this photo here is kind of dramatic. They aren't actually that much larger than their other generations, but they are slightly larger. They have a longer wingspan and they're slightly more durable so that they can actually migrate great distances in the fall time. Now, researchers still don't really understand how monarchs know when to migrate and how they migrate. They believe it has something to do with the magnetic field of our world, but also that like I said before, the monarchs have an internal clock, and the orientation of the sun is telling them kind of which direction to go and what time of year to leave. Now, this is a map of our different monarch species that we have in Canada. So we have the Western monarch, which is on the left. The Western monarch will migrate all the way to California, a little bit of a shorter distance than the monarchs that we have here, but still pretty far. The monarchs that are born in Ontario, they will migrate all the way to Mexico. And usually they all come together at this one place. It's called Sierra Madre Mountain. And they'll all come together and they will live there throughout the winter time. So they're migrating about 4,800 kilometers over a period of about 2 months that they're flying, which is pretty insane. Some of our species some of our monarchs that are born in Ontario fly to Florida instead, but most of the abundance ends up in Mexico. So if we look at a map of Ontario, we can kind of determine where these monarchs will end up. And if you look at the very bottom, there's this tiny, tiny little tip. And this is the southernmost part of Ontario. It's called Point Pelee National Park. It's the southernmost part of Ontario, and it's the greatest place that you can go to see the monarch migration. Now, if you were a birder or a bird watcher, you've probably been to Point Pelee before for bird watching in the spring or in the fall for migration, and it's the exact same thing. The monarch migration goes to this point and then it stops. And there's a reason why. They all kind of accumulate here. When we look at Point Pelee, they have to cross a great body of water before they can get to protection again. So the monarchs fly from all over Ontario down to this one point, and then they have to wait. They have to wait for the perfect temperature, the perfect climate, the weather. We don't know if it's going to be raining or super windy. The monarchs have to wait until it's perfect temperature, perfect weather outside in order to cross this big body of water. And if they don't, they could end up dying on their way. And this is just the start of their migration. So hundreds of these monarchs will end up in forested and trees in Point Pelee. And it's a really great place to go if you want to see the monarch migration. And if you can't get to Mexico. Now, this is kind of a blurry photo, but after 2 months has gone over and the monarchs have done their migration, mid-November, this is what Mexico looks like. So these are fir trees that are in Mexico, Oyamel fir trees, I think that's how you pronounce it. And there'll be tens of thousands of these monarchs all accumulated on this one kind of tree in this one area. So it's the Sierra Madre Mountains. And these monarchs will live here for the next several months. These larger monarchs, the fourth generation of all the monarchs, they have made it great distances, close to 5,000 kilometers they flew all the way to get to Mexico. And now they'll all stay together to overwinter in this one place. They create kind of this micro climate to stay warm, and the forested trees help as well. It's between 0 to 15 degrees Celsius in this area, and this helps for the monarchs to survive the cold winters that we would have in Ontario. They would not be able to survive that. Now, these monarchs have now lived over the winters, the cold winters in Ontario. They've stayed in Mexico, and they are now ready to head back to Ontario again. So March comes around, it starts to get a little bit warmer, the days start to get a little bit longer, and these monarchs are ready to go back. Unfortunately, the monarch that did all the work of getting all the way to Mexico, the bigger, larger fourth generation of monarch, will not make it back to Ontario. It gets to about Texas and it reproduces. So it actually produces the hormone again to create reproductive organs. It breeds with other monarchs that are from Mexico as well. They get to about Texas, they lay new eggs, and then that monarch will carry on. So that larger fourth generation ultimately dies, which is unfortunate, but it's part of the life cycle. Now, that fourth generation that's super, super large, they actually live for about 6 to 9 months, which is incredible. That's so much longer than the ones that summer here in Ontario. Once they get to Ontario, they live about 2 to 7 weeks max, and then they die. So it's really the fall migrants that live the longest and are the biggest. Now, monarchs don't only have to worry about predators and their migration and parasites. There's also many different human-caused impacts that monarchs have to deal with at this point. One of them is being breeding habitat loss. So their breeding habitat would be here in Ontario. There is a great shortage of milkweed plants, and this is caused by different pesticides killing them off, agricultural systems, development, urban sprawl, all sorts of different things. So the milkweed plant is the host plant. The monarchs need it to survive, and that is drastically reducing. In recent years, I think a lot more people have been planting these milkweed plants and hopefully conserving them as well. But it is the biggest impact that they have currently on their populations. One thing you can do is always plant milkweeds in your own gardens. That's the biggest suggestion I have, and just let the monarchs be completely. Another human-caused impact is overwintering habitat loss. So we talked a little bit about Sierra Madre Mountain, and that is the forested of firs, Oyamel firs, and these trees are protected by the government there. Unfortunately, there is some legal logging that is occurring around the base of this forested mountain, and as well there's illegal logging too. So Mexico's a great place to grow produce, and we get a lot of our produce from Mexico. So a lot of these forests are being destroyed basically for agricultural practices to grow produce. And it may not seem like it impacts the monarchs directly because it's not in their kind of wintering grounds, but it actually drastically can change the climate up on the mountain. It can change the wind, it can change the weather just by getting rid of a forest that's next to the other forest. So overwintering habitat loss is one that is also kind of creeping up on breeding habitat loss in the impact on its populations. And of course, like every other species on this planet, climate change is a huge impact on monarchs. It's obviously spread of parasites is one of the biggest ones. They have more resistance against things. Monarchs really rely on climate and certain signals for weather and signals of seasons in order to migrate properly, in order to grow properly and to reproduce. So climate change, with the heating of our earth, we can only expect more problems for monarchs going forward. And I'd like to say too, some people say, well, why does it matter? Monarchs are really, really great pollinators for many different species of plants. And if they are declining greatly, then other pollinators are going to be declining greatly as well. And we need pollinators for our own safety as humans as well, food safety in particular. Now, what can I do? That's often the next question. You can always help out with monarchs. One great way to help out with monarchs is to join Monarch Watch. They're a great citizen science organization that actually live follows these monarchs. So people take a picture of the monarch and they report where they found it, what the date was, and Monarch Watch will actually create a map where you can watch the monarch migration, so where the different monarchs are being found. They also have a tagging program where if you raise your own monarchs or you catch a monarch in the wild, you can put a tag on it, and then people in Mexico actually collect these monarchs and see the tag, and they'll report that they found that tag somewhere, and then you can actually see if that monarch made it to Mexico, which is pretty interesting. You do need to do your research first and some sort of training in order to properly tag these monarchs, because we don't want to harm them any more than they already are experiencing. And my very last suggestion for you, if you want to help monarchs, is to build a pollinator garden. We are so focused on having the greenest garden, or sorry, the greenest lawn, freshly cut, no weeds, no plants. And I think that's very silly. I think we need to move away from that kind of traditional thinking, and we need to move towards more having a front lawn that is eco-friendly and friendly for our pollinators and our birds and all different kinds of species. So I would change your green lawn into a beautiful pollinator garden, which is what I did this summer actually. And it doesn't have to be specifically for monarchs. You can definitely plant some common milkweed in your garden, but many different flowers can benefit different butterflies, like the swallowtail in the picture. And it's a great way to contribute just in your backyard. It's not very hard to do, and it's really interesting to watch different bees and birds and butterflies come to your pollinator garden when you build it. So those are all the suggestions I have, and that is the completion of my program. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope I have some questions as well.
Absolutely, we do. And Stephanie, thank you so much for another excellent presentation, which is what exactly we should expect from the Queen of the Monarchs. So the first question that we'll get to today from Caroline, how do I go about raising a monarch butterfly in my garden? Good question. Do I buy an egg? Like, what's the best way to get things started? Because she'd like her son to see the full life process.
Yes, good question. There is some debate about buying monarchs themselves. Just specifically when we're raising monarchs within the same kind of cage, they can transfer OE parasites. And often the monarchs that you purchase offline, sometimes they'll have parasites already on them when you purchase them. And this can just spread this parasite more, or parasitic wasp or anything like that. So my suggestion would not so much buy an egg. I would suggest more so going out into a park or anywhere that has milkweed. If you find a little egg, just look underneath the milkweed plant. If you find a little egg and you take that leaf with you, you can protect it keeping it outdoors so that it can still be exposed to the different environmental cues that it needs to grow. And that's what I would do personally. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we had a little glitch there in the in the webcam, but yeah, thanks for that answer. Next question that we'll get to, coming from Janine. What are good pollinators that deer won't eat?
Pollinator plants?
Pollinator. I'm gonna guess this is more for plants, so rather than insects.
Yeah, I don't have any experience personally. My backyard is pretty much fenced in, so I don't have any experience with the pollinator plants being eaten by deer. But I don't know if at Riverwood we have many different, the butterfly bush, like I talked about, the really large one. They're great for different types of pollinators, bees, butterflies, things like that. And I don't think we've seen any deer eating those. So maybe try butterfly bush. They fill up the space. They're huge. They offer a lot of nectar. So I'd recommend that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Now, earlier in your presentation, you mentioned Point Pelee National Park is a great place to go to watch the butterfly migration. So what would be the best time of the year to go see the butterflies making their way through Point Pelee?
Yes, so it actually differs year to year. So we had a very hot summer, and then it cooled off, and then it got hot again. So it depends on what the climate is for each year. But usually around September, October, they start migrating out of Ontario, and that's when you can find them. If you follow Point Pelee on Twitter, or even if you follow on their webpage, they usually post about it every year when the monarchs start showing up and when the best time to go is.
Great. And last question that we'll get to for today. We talked about the migration. Why is it that the monarchs keep coming to Canada? Why don't they just stay in the warmer conditions year round?
So that's a very good question, and it applies to all different migratory species, so birds as well. There's a lot of competition down there. So I showed a couple pictures where there was thousands of these monarchs in this one location. So they have to kind of disperse out of that location in order to get more milkweed and to actually be able to breed and spread. If they all stayed in that one location, they'd probably wipe out the milkweed population completely. They'd eat all of the resources, and they'd be competing against different monarch butterflies. So just like our bird species do, they'll fly to different northern parts of their range, and that's where there's more resources for them to actually consume throughout the summer region, and then in the winter they all go back.
And I guess last question, just to tie things back to Riverwood. One more question from Caroline. Do we have many monarchs at Riverwood right now?
Right now, they're kind of heading out. They're starting their migration now, but we have tons of monarchs during the summer season. We have pollinator gardens all over the place, so you'll see a lot of adult monarchs and caterpillars as well.
Great.
It's a great question.
So great questions. Great presentation again. Stephanie, thank you so much. And just a reminder to everyone watching that in-person events are once again scheduled at Riverwood starting, in fact, tomorrow with our first guided walk. And just have a look at our website at the riverwoodconservancy.org. We'll be putting more information up about our in-person events happening throughout the month of October. We have some virtual events happening as well, so hopefully you'll be able to join us either at the park or online for more of our events as we continue our environmental education initiatives. That's a mouthful. And while you're on our website, we'd very much appreciate a donation if you're financially able to help us keep conservation efforts going strong in the park as well, so we can keep presentations like this coming. So Stephanie, once again, thank you for your time today. Thank you to everyone for joining us and for your questions. And until we see you next time, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.